Morning, Jennifer Stonage here with Bross Frankel to talk to you a little bit about the Pact Act and what that did for veterans in this country. So the Pact Act was a bill that was designed to help veterans who were exposed to toxic substances during their military service, a presumption that certain conditions were caused by their toxic exposure. According to the Department of Veteran Affairs, toxic exposure refers to contact with harmful substances that can lead to adverse health effects. So first, let's talk about the types of toxic exposure that could be experienced while you're in the military. The first we refer to as TERA, toxic exposure risk activities. This includes exposure to hazardous substances during military service, whether you're directly handling them, working in the location or area near them, or being stationed where toxic materials were stored, similar to the individuals at Camp Lejeune. Second, the second thing the Pact Act did was expand the availability of the presumption of service connection for Agent Orange conditions. Originally, Agent Orange was a toxic herbicide that was used during the Vietnam War for defoliation purposes. They have expanded the presumption from Vietnam to include additional locations such as Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Guam, American Samoa, and Johnston Atoll. So that was another thing that the Pact Act did. It recognized that Agent Orange wasn't just used in Vietnam, but also in other countries as well. Third, we talk about burn pit and airborne hazards. So this is another type of toxic risk exposure. Burn pits were used by the U.S. military to dispose of waste materials in Iraq, Afghanistan, as well as additional locations. And those can cause some airborne illnesses, things like sinusitis, allergic rhinitis, any kind of breathing issues can often be related to airborne hazards such as burn pit exposure. And then finally, radiation exposure. So this includes veterans who were exposed to ionizing radiation during their military service, including those that participated in nuclear testing, cleanup activities such as cleanup in Eniwetok Atoll, nuclear missions near the Palomares, Spain, and Greenland. So how does TERA relate to the Pact Act and service-connected disabilities? So put more simply, TERA is just a term that the VA is using now to define exposure. So they call them toxic exposure risk activities, but the toxins, they're not limited to air pollutants. They include chemicals, occupational hazards, radiation, and warfare agents. So the Pact Act opened up the possibility of service-connecting conditions that were not previously recognized as connected to the times in service. The downside, as a positive, the Pact Act really opened up doors for multiple different veterans to seek service connection for many different types of claims and no longer having this barrier of needing to prove their nexus. Now we have some presumptions in place, similar to Agent Orange and diabetes. We now have additional presumptions like that. The downside is that we're seeing sort of an uptick in VA examiners really holding on to TERA exposure as a reason for denying cases. So they're denying these cases based on a lack of TERA exposure, even when TERA is not the issue. So, for example, paratrooper who's falling constantly, landing on his flat feet and develops flat feet, they're not going to assume they may look at that as TERA exposure because technically he participated in a risky behavior, and then they deny it because they'll say it's not connected to his time in the service. However, TERA is not the main theory of service connection. So currently under the regulations, a C&P examination or a medical opinion is required where all TERA is asserted. However, even if the VA concedes TERA exposure, it does not mean that they're going to agree with all veterans talking about their disabilities being linked to their TERA exposure. However, in more recent decisions, it does appear that the VA will only produce an opinion for TERA exposure and is omitting from consideration additional theories of entitlement, which include direct service connection, a chronic condition that manifests after service, or even secondary service connection and presumptive service connection. What does all this mean for you? Well, if you're a veteran and you've been exposed to toxic risks or toxic materials, So if you've been exposed to toxic materials and your VA claim is being denied, please reach out to us at Bross Frankel. We'll review your decision for free. We'll discuss what we think we can do to help, and we're ready to get to work when you can.